You were rumored to be one of the rescue buyers of long-term capital. What was the play there? What did you see?
Well, there's a story in the current Fortune magazine, one has Rupert Murdoch's picture on the cover that tells the whole story of our involvement. It's kind of an interesting story because it's a long story, so I won't go into all the background of it, but I got the really serious call about long-term capital about 4 weeks ago this Friday, whenever it was my granddaughter. I got it in mid-afternoon, and my granddaughter was having her birthday party that evening, and then I was flying that night to Seattle to go on a 12-day trip with Gates to Alaska in a private train, all kinds of things where I was really out of communication. But I got this call on a Friday afternoon saying that things were really getting serious there. I'd had some other calls before that the article gets into a few weeks earlier. I know those people, most of them pretty well. So a lot of them were Solomon when I was there. And the place was imploding, and the Fed was sending people up that weekend. And so between that Friday and the following Wednesday, when the New York Fed, in effect, orchestrated a rescue effort, but without any federal money involved, I was quite active, but I was having this terrible time because we were sailing up through these canyons, which held no interest for me whatsoever, in Alaska. And the captain would say, if we just steer over here, we might see some bears and whales. And I said, steer where you get a good satellite connection, because I want. So it was. In fact, there's a picture, unfortunately, where I've got my Old Faithful is going off behind me, and I've got my back to it. I'm on the phone, which was the group thought it was kind of funny the way I was working the phone. But we put in a bid on Wednesday morning. By then I was in Bozeman, Montana. And I talked to Bill McDonough, the head of the New York Fed, about 10 o'clock. They were having a meeting of the bankers at 10 o'clock that morning in New York, and I caught him right. We actually delivered a message to him. He called me out there in Wyoming a little bit before 10 New York time, and we made a bid. It was because it was being done at a long distance and everything. It was really the outline of a bid, but in the end. It was a bid for $250 million, essentially, for the net assets of. But we would have put in $3.75 billion on top of that, and it would have been $3 billion from Berkshire Hathaway, $700 million from AIG, and $300 million from Goldman Sachs. And we submitted that, but we put a very short time fuse on it because when you're bidding on $100 billion worth of securities that are moving around, you don't want to leave a fixed price bid out there very long. Plus, we were worried about it getting shopped. In the end, the bankers made the deal, and. But it was an interesting period. The whole long-term capital management, I hope most of you are familiar with it, but the whole story is really fascinating because if you take John Meriwether and Eric Rosenfeld, Larry Hillenbrand, Greg Hawkins, Victor Agani, the 2 Nobel Prize winners, Merton and Scholes, if you take the 16 of them, they probably have as high an average IQ as any 16 people working together in one business in the country, including at Microsoft or wherever you want to name. So an incredible amount of intellect in that room. Now you combine that with the fact that those 16 had extensive experience in the field they were operating. I mean, this was not a bunch of guys who had made their money, selling men's clothing and then all of a sudden went into the securities business or anything. They'd had, in aggregate, the 16 that probably had 350 or 400 years of experience doing exactly what they were doing. And then you throw in the third factor, that most of them had virtually all of their very substantial net worths in the business. So they had their own money up, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of their own money up, super high intellect, working in a field they knew, and essentially they went broke. And that, to me, is absolutely fascinating. I mean, if I ever write a book, it's going to be called Why Smart People Do Dumb Things. My partner says that it should be autobiographical, but this might be an interesting illustration. And these are perfectly decent guys. I respect them, and they helped me out when I had problems with Solomon, and so they're not bad people at all. But to make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need. And that's foolish. That is just plain foolish. It doesn't make any difference what your IQ is. If you risk something that is important to you for something that is unimportant to you, it just does not make any sense. I don't care whether the odds are 100 to 1 that you succeed or 1,000 to 1 that you succeed. If you hand me a gun with 1,000 chambers, 1,000,000 chambers in it, and there's a bullet in one chamber, and you said, put it up your temple, how much do you want to be paid to pull it once? I'm not going to pull it. You can name any sum you want, but it doesn't do anything for me on the upside. And I think the downside's fairly clear. So I'm not interested in that kind of a game. And yet people do it financially and without thinking about it very much. There was a great book. It wasn't a great book. It was a great title. It was a lousy book written once with a great title by Walter Gutman. The title was You Only Have to Get Rich Once. Now, that seems pretty fundamental, doesn't it? What difference, if you've got $100 million at the start of the year and you're going to make 10% if you're unleveraged and 20% if you're leveraged 99 times out of 100, what difference does it make at the end of the year whether you've got 110 million or 120 million? Makes no difference at all. I mean, if you die at the end of the year, the guy that writes up the story may make a typo and he may say 110 even if he had 120, so you've got nothing at all. It makes absolutely no difference. It makes no difference to your family, it makes no difference to anything. And yet the downside, particularly managing other people's money, is not only losing all your money, but it's disgrace and humiliation and facing friends whose money you've lost and everything. I just can't imagine an equation that makes sense for. And yet 16 guys with very high IQs who are very decent people entered into that game. And, I think it's madness. And it's produced by an over-reliance to some extent on things. Those guys would tell me back when I was at Solomon, that a 6 Sigma event wouldn't touch us, or a 7 Sigma event, but they were wrong. I mean, their history does not tell you the probabilities of future financial things happening. And they had a great reliance on mathematics, and they felt that the beta of the stock told you something about the risk of the stock. It doesn't tell you a damn thing about the risk of the stock, in my view. And Sigmas do not tell you about the risk of going broke, in my view, and maybe in their view now too. But I don't like to even use them as an example because they are. I mean, the same thing in a different way could happen to any of us probably, where we really have a blind spot about something that's crucial because we know a whole lot about something else. It's like Henry Kaufman said the other day. He said the people who are going broke in this situation are just of two types: the ones who knew nothing and the ones that knew everything. And it's sad in a way. I urge you, in anything, we never basically borrow money. I mean, we get flow through our insurance business and do things, but I never borrowed money. I never borrowed money when I had $10,000 basically, because what difference did it make? I was having fun as I went along, and it didn't make any difference whether I had $10,000 or $1 million or $10 million. Except if I had a medical emergency or something had come along like that. But I was going to do the same things when I had a lot of money as when I had very little money. If you think about the difference between me and you in terms of how we live, we wear the same clothes basically. SunTrust gives me mine, but you. So we wear the same clothes. We eat. We all have a chance to drink the juice of the gods here. But we all go to McDonald's, or better yet, Dairy Queen, and we live in a house that's warm in winter and cool in summer, and we watch Nebraska, Texas A&M on a big screen. You see it the same way I see it. We do everything. Our lives aren't that different. You'll get decent medical care if something happens to you, and I'll get decent medical care. The only thing we do is we travel differently. I ride around this little plane, and I love it. And that takes money. But if you leave that aside, we travel differently. But other than travel, I think about it. Think, what can I do that you can't do? Now, I get to work in a job that I love, but I've always worked in a job I love. I loved it when I loved it just as much when it was a big deal if I made $1,000. And I urge you to work in jobs you love. I mean, I think you're out of your mind if you keep taking jobs that you don't like because you think it'll look good on your resume. I was with a fellow at Harvard the other day who was taking me over to talk, and he was 28, and he was telling me what he'd done in life, which was terrific. And then I said, "What are you going to do next?" And he said, after I get out my MBA, he says, "I think maybe I ought to go to work for a management consulting firm because it'll look good on my resume." And I said, "Wait a second, you've been 28, you've been doing all these things. I mean, you've got a resume that's 10 times as good as anybody I've ever seen it already." I said, "If you take another job you don't like, I said, isn't that a little like saving up sex for your old age? there comes a time when you ought to just start doing what, So, I think I got the point across to him. But you ought to take a job. When you get out here, take a job you love. Don't take a job that, you think is going to look good on your resume. Take a job you love. You may change it later on, but you'll jump out of bed in the morning. I mean, when I got out of Columbia, the first thing I tried to go to work for Graham immediately. I offered to go to work for him for nothing. He said I was overpriced. But I kept pestering him. I went out to Omaha and I sold securities for 3 years, and I kept writing him and giving him ideas and doing all this. And finally, I went to work for him for a couple of years, and it was a great experience. But I always really worked in a job. I've worked in a job that I loved doing. And you should really take a job that if you were independently wealthy, you would take. That's the job to take, because that's the one that you're going to have great fun in. You'll learn something. You'll be excited about it. And you can't miss. You may go do something else later on, but you'll get way more out of it. And I don't care what the starting salary is or anything of the sort. I don't know how I got off on that, but there I am. So I do think that if you think you're going to be a lot happier if you've got 2X instead of X, you're probably making a mistake. I mean, you ought to find something you like that works with that, and you'll get in trouble if you think that making 10X or 20X is the answer to everything in life, because then you will do things like borrow money when you shouldn't, or maybe cut corners on things that your employer wants you to cut corners on. Or it just doesn't make any sense. You won't like it when you look back on it.